Myles Garrett chases the single season sack record as the Buffalo Bills come to town, back in the mix for another AFC title. It all comes to a head on Sunday, and we talk about it next on a crossover edition of Locked On Browns and Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, Browns fans? How you living, Bills fans? And welcome to a crossover edition of Locked On Browns and Locked On Bills, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network, which wouldn't be possible without you making our shows your first listen every day. We've got a good one for you as Myles Garrett meets Josh Allen with a chance to break the NFL's single-season sack record, plus another starts for Shedeur Sanders. We'll talk through some key matchups on both sides, paths to victory for both these teams, and more. It all comes your way on a crossover edition of our respective shows. But first, I do want to remind you that our crossover Thursdays are presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Joe, I got to be honest with you, man. Watching the Bills from afar, I have been in awe of just what they've been able to do, particularly pulling off all these comebacks. They've become the comeback kings, if you will, of the NFL, and they've done it amidst a lot of adversity with injuries and all these different things, some glaring issues at wide receiver and on the defensive side of things. Just from your perspective, how have they been able to do what they've done and sort of pull off these comebacks and pull the rabbit out of a hat, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's really come down to two things. First of all, that quarterback, Josh Allen, he's pretty doggone good, and he's making a heck of a case to maybe be a repeat MVP. You know, we'll see what happens the last 3 weeks of the season. Certainly Matthew Stafford in that mix, Drake May in that mix as well. And so Josh Allen has been special when the Bills need him to be special, and that has included some really big-time comebacks where he just figures it out. Clutch situation, doesn't matter, who the receivers are. He gets it done, and that's been a big deal, but also a defense that knows how to adjust. I'm not going to tell you a great story about the Bills defense. It's the biggest concern I have. It's probably the reason that they might not go all the way this year. But this coaching staff finds ways to put these guys in positions in the second half, late in games. They get a big stop. They get a big takeaway, and they've been able to do this kind of time and time again here. And, certainly not the most dominant Bills team that I think we've seen under their glow up really since 2020 when they became an upper echelon team, but a really resilient team that knows how to figure it out.
Yeah, I've noticed the struggles the Bills defense has had. You bring up it being your biggest concern, and it's funny. Like each week, as I'm sitting watching Browns games play out in front of me, I'm checking the box scores and seeing these things, and I'm like, oh, the Bills are down. Like, how are they going to win this game? And it's kind of I have a similar thought, just like, how is this team as good as they've been in past years with given some of the struggles they have on defense? And what's funny and interesting about this matchup this weekend is it is kind of two teams in opposite places, right? The Bills have, not only because of the wins and losses, but because the Bills have a great offense and a questionable defense. The Browns' strength is their defense, and they have a very shaky offense. And it's going to be fun to see these two things kind of collide as well, because you have Josh Allen, who, like you said, pretty darn good quarterback, I would say, and Myles Garrett, who's chasing history with this single-season sack record. He needs just one sack to tie it, 1.5 sacks to break it, and there's a chance that he can get that done this weekend and make Josh Allen part of a highlight that's played over and over again in NFL history.
Yeah, it's funny. Josh Allen commented on that on Wednesday afternoon and said he likes highlights, but he doesn't like to be in other people's highlights. So I'm sure Josh would not want to be the quarterback that gets sacked, that breaks the record. But, Josh Allen has actually taken more sacks this year than usual, right? That's been an interesting development, and certainly that's a huge storyline, is Myles Garrett and this sack record. I'm a big fan of Myles Garrett. I love pass rushers. It's like my favorite thing. I joke. Sometimes I think I like sacks more than touchdowns because I love the pass rush element. And, Myles Garrett's the dude, right? I think he's the best non-quarterback in the league. And it'll be cool to see him go up against some good tackles in Spencer Brown and Myles Garrett. And Josh Allen's chasing a little history in this game, too. If he scores one touchdown, he'll become the fastest player ever to reach 300 touchdowns for his career and the first one to do it before 30 years old. So maybe both teams will have something to celebrate on Sunday, regardless of who wins the game.
Yeah, that would be a nice feather in the cap for both these guys. And what's also interesting about that matchup is like Josh Allen's dual threat ability means it's not going to be easy for Myles to necessarily just get that record. We're not going to have like a Brett Favre taking a dive thing like Michael Strahan. It's going to be tough to sort of track down Josh Allen at times. And so we'll see if he's able to do it. Other offensive linemen and quarterbacks have tried and failed to avoid getting sacked by Myles Garrett. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. I mean, a couple weeks ago, you saw him Euro step Trent Williams, who's still one of the best in the business at the tackle spot, and be able to make a play. So I think for Browns fans, with a team that's sitting here with 3 wins, this is the storyline. This is the thing that has you still invested in this team and sort of watching till the very end. There's another thing we'll get to in a second. The main thing I think people are still following this team for is, can our star player, one of the best in franchise history, accomplish this feat and put together this incredible season that nobody's ever seen before?
I'm sure it'll mean a lot to do it at home as well for Myles Garrett. And, if he beat Spencer Brown or Deion Dawkins, he'd beat a good tackle and he'd sack a great quarterback in Josh Allen. And so it's definitely something to pay attention to. I kind of expect it to happen. And I guess it'll be pretty relieving, but I'm sure the opportunity to do it in, less than 16 games, also for like a team that doesn't play good complementary football. I think that's probably the most impressive thing to me about what Myles Garrett has gotten done this year. It's not like the Browns are leading a lot of games and he can pin his ears back and go rush the passer, right? You talk about, you got to earn the right to rush the passer. Usually that's through leads and stopping the run. And of course the Browns do stop the run, but obviously not a lot of favorable game scripts to pin your ears back, but he's getting it done. And even as somebody who doesn't necessarily root for the Browns or Myles Garrett's success, it's really been a fun storyline to watch.
Yeah, and I can tell you there's been some advanced metrics and stats that have shown that Myles has actually accomplished this so far with less opportunities than other guys who have been up in this echelon of sack totals just throughout the season. Because, like you said, they're not playing with a lot of leads. They're constantly playing from behind, but he's still finding a way to get it done, which just continues to speak to his greatness. We'll get back to Myles here in a little bit, but the other big storyline I would say on the Browns side of things, it's an obvious one, is Shedeur Sanders and everything that comes with him, the fanfare of it all. The fact that he's been given this last 7 games here to dating back a few weeks to show what he can do and try to sort of cement himself as the starting quarterback of this football team. And it's going to be interesting because he goes up against a Bills defense that's one of the best at stopping the pass or limiting passing offenses. And he's going to have to sort of find some ways to have some success, particularly off of what I think was probably his worst performance so far since he took over as the starter against the Chicago Bears this past weekend. So everyone paying close attention to what he does the rest of the way to see if he can convince the Browns that he maybe is the future at that position.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how that goes. The defense for Buffalo, obviously not necessarily a top-end defense. And so, how does Shedeur look as he continues to get more opportunities? Obviously, a meaningful game for Buffalo and a meaningful game from Cleveland through that perspective where the evaluation opportunity to assess Shedeur Sanders as potentially the guy is really, really important. So I think there's a lot at stake for both of these teams, obviously different, but a huge evaluation opportunity against a defensive-minded head coach and that defense that does find a way to get those big plays. We'll see what they can get done against Shedeur.
Certainly going to be something to keep an eye on. Browns fans will be watching it very closely. We need to dive into, Joe, some of the key matchups coming up on Sunday in this one. I think we already highlighted one of the big ones, of course, and we'll get into that a little bit more coming up next on a crossover edition of Locked On Browns and Locked On Bills. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports. Bowl games, big basketball matchups, and playoff pushes. It's all happening at once. And while we're making choices every day, one of the most fun places to make the right call is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on a player, on at least 2 players' projections. Lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. Creating a lineup takes less than a minute, and the app takes the whole process and makes it smooth and intuitive. The new Stacks feature lets you choose the same player up to 3 times in one lineup, so you could pick more on Josh Allen's QB passing yards, touchdowns, or rushing yards if you're watching Bills and Browns this weekend. Plus, if a player leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot feature saves your lineup from a loss. I wish other fantasy apps had that feature. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, It's good to be right. Spencer German here of Locked On Browns, Joe Marino of Locked On Bills, as we continue breaking down this weekend's matchup between our two shows here coming on down the pike on Sunday. And this is the point of the program. We like to dive into some key matchups in this one. Joe, I'll let you have the floor first. I'm curious, what's the first sort of area you're looking at as one that maybe stands out between these two teams that the Bills are going to sort of have to take advantage of or maybe step their game up?
Well, I think it comes down to the Bills' rushing defense against Quinshon Judkins and this Browns rushing offense. I know that there's a lot of musical chairs going on with the offensive line right now, but I really like Quinshon Judkins. I think he's showcased himself as a guy that's going to be a good starting NFL running back, and I think obviously some stability with the overall offense will unlock more of his consistency, but this is a Bills run defense that struggles big time. They can be had. They get creased very often. They don't have defensive linemen that are very firm against the run. They have tackling issues on the second level. They have angle issues on the third level. And obviously this is a game that I think Cleveland's going to want to show up to and run the ball, shorten possessions, keep Josh Allen on the sideline. We know what style of game that they're going to want to play. And the Bills have got to be able to really figure it out against the run, or else it's going to be a very annoying game, if you will, for Buffalo. And so you got to be able to stop the run. You have to key in on Quinshon Judkins and not let that get out of control, and this game wind up being closer than maybe most people anticipate.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm glad you bring this one up, too, because I think Quinshon is an uber-talented player. He was one of my favorite running backs in this class coming out. I actually really thought that he was a perfect fit for the Browns, and he reminded me a lot of Kareem Hunt. Like I felt like I saw that in his game, and I was when they drafted him, I was like, this is perfect. This is the type of guy you need. But he's had some issues this year, most notably in the form of just the way his offensive line has failed at sort of protecting him and giving him those running lanes to sort of make things happen. And he started the year averaging a decent amount on the ground. The last 4 games, he's averaging just 2.8 yards per carry, and 37 of his 82 carries this year have gone for 2 yards or less, which is a pretty staggering sort of metric there. So, yeah, like this kind of feels like something has to give, right? The Bills' run defense has struggled this year, but at the same time, the Browns' run game has struggled this year. So, who kind of wins that matchup? I think is going to be massively important in this game. For me, we talked about him a ton in the intro, but I do think like everything, and every time I do one of these crossover shows, for me, the number one matchup I'm watching constantly is Myles, where he's lining up, how the Bills sort of plan to attack him and try to keep him out of the backfield and really ruining the game plan for them, if you will. He's that type of player. He's a game wrecker. And as I brought up with like Trent Williams on a couple weeks ago, like, he makes even the good guys sometimes look silly. So the Bills, I'm sure, are going to have a ton of different things that they throw at him. Myles has seen just about everything. He's seen 3 linemen. He's seen multiple chips and a tackle. He's seen everything. And I'm sure there's going to be opportunities for him to still, pressure Josh Allen, disrupt some plays, because that's just the type of player that he is. So I'll be curious to see how the Bills kind of try to handle that and limit it the best that they can.
Yeah, you and me both, Spencer. And the Bills are a team that loves to run 5-man protections, right? Just your 5 offensive linemen and kind of trusting Josh Allen to sort things out as a really good quarterback in terms of navigating the pocket and not allowing pressure to turn into sacks. And I don't think that's going to work against Myles Garrett. I think you're going to have to give some extra attention to him. And that was something we talked about with the Houston game. The Bills lost to Houston, and they went 5-man protections 90% of the time. And Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter gave them a lot of problems. Well, for as good as Anderson and Hunter are, Myles Garrett's better. And do they go into this game saying, us against you? Because they do a lot of times. They believe a lot in Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown. And I do too, but I think this is a different kind of cat, right? You're talking about a generational, like a legit generational talent. That word gets thrown around way too much, but it really does apply to Myles Garrett. And I think it would be really silly for Buffalo to say, hey, Dawkins versus Garrett, Brown versus Garrett, or if they move him around, whoever it is against Garrett. I think you have to commit some extra attention there and not just say us versus you. I think that's silly, especially when Josh Allen's health is on the line.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. It certainly isn't a task for just one man alone. I think sometimes you're going to have to do that just out of necessity. Some play calls, you don't have enough guys to sort of leave in the backfield or whatever, and you just got to kind of let it be one-on-one, but you want to avoid that as much as possible. So, again, I'll be fascinated to see what types of things they do throw his direction. The other big one for me that I'm looking at is, and it sort of stays on the defensive side of the ball for me, is just this Bills wide receiving core against the Browns secondary. Part of that also hinges on Denzel Ward being healthy for this game. He said on Wednesday that he's feeling a lot better. He missed last week with a calf issue. I also think, the temperatures in Chicago probably didn't help the fact that he was going to not be able to play. I don't think they wanted to chance it and put him out there and have him risk any further injury. Going to be a lot more mild here in Cleveland as far as like winter weather is concerned. So I think that matters, but this secondary has been equally as good this season for the Browns as that defensive line and Myles Garrett has been. And Denzel's talked a lot about how teams have just not thrown his direction. And with the Bills, as it's very known, I being from Western New York and having been on the Bills beat several years ago, I still see a lot of the comments and things that people are saying about that team. And I know the biggest complaint from fans is we don't have a number one wide receiver. And so I kind of wonder how the Bills try to take advantage of that, or how they try to make that happen against a really good Browns secondary.
Yeah, the Bills don't show up in any game with mismatch opportunities at wide receiver against corners. And I think Tyson Campbell and Denzel Ward's a heck of a pair of corners. But respectfully, I'm not sure it matters in a game like this as much, because the Bills don't have receiving talent that's going to come close to being able to win those matchups with any level of consistency. This is a passing game that's about running backs and tight ends, and really tight ends. It's Dawson Knox, it's Dalton Kincaid, it's sometimes Jackson Hawes, the rookie. They get the slot receiver going, Khalil Shakir. They throw the ball to Ty Johnson and Ray Davis and James Cook, but it's an afterthought when you consider those guys on the perimeter. And Brandon Cooks is a random recent arrival, Keon Coleman, whoever knows what's going to happen there. Gabe Davis, Willie Dress, Josh Palmer. Yeah, it's like it almost makes your really good corners. And I mean, whatever team it is, last week it was Carlton Davis and Christian Gonzalez, or it's a couple weeks ago, it's Houston. It's Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter. It's like, yeah, these are really good corners. I don't think the Bills are showing up thinking, boy, we got to go after them. Right. And so it'll be interesting to see what type of appetite they have. Obviously, Denzel Ward's availability is a big deal. And if he can't go, I think maybe you would say, all right, maybe there are some matchup opportunities, but I think the Bills will continue to be careful, testing those matchups on the perimeter. Obviously, we know this is a Cleveland team that's going to present a lot of one high, middle of the field, closed structures. They're going to challenge you to work the ball out breaking. They're going to challenge you to attack those corners where they're really, really strong. And, I think the Bills have figured out their best opportunities to kind of get away from that. But, if they go out there, if the Bills show up and say, hey, Keon Coleman against Tyson Campbell, boy, it's going to be a long afternoon for the Bills.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the tight ends, because and James Cook, frankly, because that I think is where it's going to be sort of the bread and butter for Browns defense to get stops. Like, can Carson Schlesinger get out and cover those guys and make plays like he's done all season? Can Grant Delpit fly up and make some of those plays as well? As you sort of think deeper and bigger picture on how the Bills are going to probably try to attack him here, I think that stuff also matters. Joe, any final key matchups that you kind of have your eye on going into this game on Sunday?
Well, I think we hit the major stuff. We'll kind of talk more about the Bills versus Shedeur Sanders, because ultimately, if they can stop the run, if they can score, if they can put Cleveland in a position where they're chasing the game, right? If they're down a couple of scores, and this becomes on Shedeur Sanders, I think the Bills would relish that opportunity. And so, how do the Bills get Cleveland into that game script? And how does Cleveland avoid that game script, I think, is really what this game's going to come down to.
Well, that hasn't been hard for most teams. We'll talk about it coming up here next on a crossover edition of Locked On Browns and Locked On Bills. Spencer German, Locked On Browns. Joe Marino, Locked On Bills, as we give you some final thoughts leading into the Browns and Bills matchup coming on down the pike this weekend here in Cleveland. And Joe, we sort of the one thing we sort of avoided in the key matchup conversation was Shedeur Sanders' role in kind of all this. And I think you sort of laid out a very good point there before the break, just the idea that if the Bills can get the Browns chasing a little bit, it probably spells a good day for them overall. And I think that's very true. For me, I think any path to victory for the Browns on Sunday, honestly, it kind of starts with whether or not like the Bills come in with sort of like a lackadaisical attitude to this game. And sometimes that happens, right? Like off of a high win, you just beat the Patriots to get back in the division race, all those different things. Sometimes teams come in a little bit flat. I'm not anticipating that's going to happen because I think the Bills understand they just got back into that division conversation. They don't want to let up now. They want to kind of keep their foot on the gas. But if they come in sleepwalking at all, that could help the Browns a little bit. But I think any path for the Browns to win this game starts with maybe the Bills taking them a little bit more lightly than they probably should.
I think it's a fair call out, Spencer. I would like to think that the Bills, knowing what's at stake in this game, wouldn't do that. And I think there's been times where you could probably say that's happened. The Bills really, they're a really good December team. I think they have like a 26-4 record in December going back to like the last 4 years. They really do kind of focus in and handle their business. I'm not saying it's above them to take this game lightly and not do what they need to do to win it. But I'd like to think that the leadership and where this team's been, it's a battle-tested team, right? It's not a team that hasn't paid its dues. It has plenty of scars. And so I think that they will take this very, very seriously. And that's why, like, my top key is you've got to go out there and be aggressive and try to invite Cleveland to a track meet. Yeah, I think that's what you have to do. And I think you'll like where that goes. And Spencer, I can only imagine the world of covering Shedeur Sanders as the quarterback from, the draft through all of it, right? It's just been a lot of thoughts, a lot of opinions. We can cut through the noise and talk about it. Since he's taken over as a starting quarterback the last 4 weeks, there certainly was a high against Tennessee, but if we're being honest, collectively, it's been pretty poor. And we're talking about a day 3 rookie quarterback in an offense where the structure has not been very sound. So I don't necessarily think that it's been a great opportunity for Shedeur to come out and like really showcase himself, especially as a guy that hasn't taken the first team reps until recently. Like, ideally, he would have had an entire offseason kind of building towards this and this infrastructure, and they'd be keenly aware of kind of what he is as a player and how to maximize that. So I think you have to take everything with a grain of salt. But let's be honest. I mean, over the last 4 weeks, among starting quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders is 30th in turnover-worthy throw rate. He's 29th in catchable ball rate. He's 31st in completion percentage over expectation. He throws to his first read only 54% of the time. That's 30th. His average time to throw is 3.17 seconds. That's the slowest trigger in the league. He's pressured on 50% of his dropbacks. That's the third highest. Like, it's not really sound. And so if the Bills can get them in a position where they're one-dimensional and that one dimension is throwing the football, the Bills are going to have a really good chance to take care of their business.
Yeah, and I think that, that as we're talking past victory, that's why I think the run game for both these teams really is kind of the essential piece here. I mentioned some of the struggles of Quinshon Judkins, especially the last couple of weeks. If they can actually have success doing that, I think that sets Shedeur up for better success. I think that sets the offense up as a whole for better success. But I don't necessarily trust that that's going to happen because the offensive line is so banged up. They've dealt with so many injuries. Guys are constantly in and out of that thing. It seems like Wyatt Teller is trending in the right direction towards potentially being back out there, and so that would be a step in the right direction, I think, for this group. But even he has taken some steps back, I think, this year in terms of his play. So it's just been a mess. Like, I think it all starts there for the Browns on offense. But you bring up a huge point when it comes to Shedeur. Like, there's the way I would describe it is there's been a lot of Shedeur's clearly at a point right now where he's still learning and developing in real time and trying to become a better player,
right? Like,
normal,
reasonable, yes, absolutely.
For sure. But the thing that I think has been intriguing is that there's some moments or there's some throws. Last week he hit 2 big ones to Isaiah Bond deep down the field. And honestly, one of the balls that became an interception for him in that Chicago game was this beautiful pass to Jerry Jeudy. It was probably one of the best throws he's thrown since he took over as the starter, and Jerry just could not bring it in, let it slip through his hands, and then Jalen Johnson ends up with an interception in the end zone to sort of stall a drive. Like, there's been these moments where you're like, okay, this guy can make those big high-level throws at this level, and then you see some of the regression of, him not necessarily recognizing that there's some simulated cover or simulated blitz, and then a guy drops into coverage and he throws it right to him for a pick. So those are the things he's still working through. But I agree with you. Like, if the Bills make this, if the Bills run defense shows up and can stop that, like many teams in the previous weeks have done, and they put it on Shedeur Sanders to win this game, it's going to be game over pretty quickly here if that's what this turns into.
Yeah, and I think that's why the Bills have to make a commitment to it, right? Well, whatever it is, extra guys in the box, play heavy, whatever you have to do to make sure that Cleveland doesn't have that rhythm running the football, that has to be at the forefront of what the Bills try to get done. Another thing here I want to get into with the Bills is, I think they got to protect Josh Allen in this game. I mean, we've obviously talked a lot about Myles Garrett. He's a freak of freaks. And obviously the pass rush, that conversation is Myles Garrett. But this is a team in Cleveland that's number one in pressure rate in the league. They're number two in pressure rate over expectation. They're number one in sack rate. Of course, Myles Garrett has a lot to do with that. But there's other good players. Mason Graham's a really good young player. I like Isaiah McGuire. I've been a big fan of him since I scouted him at Missouri. Alex Wright is a freak of his own in his own way. No, not quite the Myles Garrett, but he's a good player. Shelby Harris is a good interior rusher. Cam Thomas has provided some juice in a sub role, and so you can obviously focus on Myles Garrett, and you should. There's other players here that can affect things, and so making sure that Josh Allen remains upright in this game, absolutely paramount if the Bills are going to go anywhere this year.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And you name off a lot of those guys. I can tell you, like Malik Collins has been sorely missed. The last week in particular, he was such a huge addition for them, and he was part of what made that defensive line so dominant and be able to get so much pressure. I think that's an area that the Bills can sort of exploit, not having him out there. The last thing I'll say in terms of path to victory, this is one of those games where I think the Browns are going to need as clean a special teams game as they can possibly get. And by the way, that is nobody's expecting that, because the Browns special teams have been some of, if not the worst in the league this year. And it's constant. It's, first play of the game against the Bears last week, a 52-yard return by the Bears to set them up with a short field. And they didn't score on that drive, but because they punted down at the 1, that just set everything in motion for this really rough start that gets them eventually down 14-0, and it's already an insurmountable lead. And I think back to that Packers game that they sort of stole early in the season. They only pulled that off because special teams played like a perfect game. And I've started to bring this up more and more week over week, that if the Browns expect to win some of these games, they need their special teams to show up. It's a tough ask, because they haven't done it to this point. There's things that need corrected, and they just don't get corrected. But that's going to be another point in this game that I think could really flip it one way or another. If they play perfect on special teams, then they give themselves at least a fighting chance. But if they're giving up big returns and things like that to the Bills, on top of what the Bills can do offensively, I think it's probably game over.
Well, Ray Davis has come along well for the Bills in the kick return game. I actually think he's number one in the league in kick return average. It's been a nice revelation, but the Bills are about to be on their third kicker of the year.
Yeah, that's true.
He's not available. They had to sign Michael Badgley off the street to come in and get through this game. Their punt return game really hasn't been there. Their punt coverage has been solid, and so that's definitely an area where obviously you want to win all the phases of the game, and so we'll see how that goes. But that kick return opportunity for Buffalo could be notable. That's something that they've had a strength. Spencer, the last thing from me in terms of my keys to victory for the Bills is, don't beat yourself. Right? The Bills are capable of beating themselves. They've done it. They've taken losses this year to Tua. They've taken 30-13 to the Dolphins. To Michael Penix, right? Not a high. He's been horrible, right? If we're being honest. Davis Mills, a backup quarterback with Houston, all 3 games on the road. Like, it's totally within the realm of possibilities for the Bills to beat themselves, have some goofy penalties, have some goofy giveaways on offense, and you give teams life. And obviously, this is a Browns team that's coming in as heavy road or home underdogs. You keep them in it. It can be dangerous, and the Bills have to be careful to not beat themselves, something that they've proven able to do in the past.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the top of what I said, right? Like, if the Bills show up and they're sort of lackadaisical and they think, oh, we're just going to be able to beat this team easily, I think that does open the door a little bit for the Browns to potentially pull this one off and steal one. And that would be huge, because with a lot of talk right now in Cleveland about future of Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry and all those things, pulling off a win against the Bills would be a potentially a way to sort of save jobs and whatnot. So we'll see what happens on Sunday for sure. I know many of you watching and listening to this, you already live your team every day. Make sure you take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club and get Locked On Browns or Locked On Bills with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more. It's all just $5 a month or $50 a year. Head to lockedonbrowns.supercast.com or lockedonbills.supercast.com, or you can check out the link in our respective show notes as well. But that's going to do it for us. He's Joe Marino. I'm Spencer German. What a great conversation as we set the stage for Browns and Bills this weekend. Enjoy the game, and we'll talk to you on Friday.